Hello and welcome to the Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything fantasy and science fiction. Your host is Matt Crosswhite, and the subject matter expert is Josiah Marshall. And here we go.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi Podcast. I'm the host, Matt Crosswhite, joined by the subject matter expert, Josiah Marshall. How are you today, Josiah?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm laughing. I'm having a ball.
Excellent. So last episode, we talked about your top 3 picks for fantasy novels, and you spelled out that you were choosing them by impact in your life personally. And so now you've got top 3 of same for the sci-fi category.
I do. I will admit, though, these ones were a little harder. Only because... Okay, so I know that the title of the podcast is just fantasy and sci-fi, but I'm going to have to admit that when it comes to reading sci-fi, I haven't read as much as I've either listened to or watched.
Okay.
I'm going to just be honest.
Listen to including radio dramas and audiobooks?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
So, but there are 3 that I definitely found to be 3 that has impacted me over my life. And I've been very grateful for these books.
I just got to say, before you jump in, last episode, you so smoothly used a term that I've never heard anyone use. You were talking about Eustace's experience becoming a dragon and then his quote-unquote de-dragoning. So yeah. I'm excited for this episode to see what new terms I pick up as in the sci-fi realm.
All right. Well, I'll see what I can do. But let's see here. I'm going to go in the route that that these books came in my life. Okay. So the first one is a guy named Alton Gansky. He wrote some really cool series, Perry Sachs Mysteries, and oh my, the other series just popped out of my head. But he writes mysteries, and they tend to have maybe at times a supernatural twist to them, but they are more. Technically, they would be considered more fiction. However, they do consider they bring in elements that would be considered sci-fi or fantasy, but more on the sci-fi element, especially with the book I'm going to bring up. Because the book I'm going to bring up is called Vanished. So he's got one of his characters, I believe it's Perry in this one. Yeah, and the other one's Stanton. That's right, Stanton is the other guy. But Perry in this one, he's being tasked with figuring out why a military base is losing all of its personnel. All of its personnel is just disappearing. They have no clue what's going on at all. And so Perry's tasked with the job of being able to go figure it out. And the things that he is met with really rattles him and rattles his reality of going, wait a minute, could this really be what's going on? And then the more he looks into it, the more real it becomes. And he's like, oh, this is just, it's so far-fetched. You would go, yeah, this can't be happening. But ultimately, he not only solves the problem, or at least figures out what the problem is, but has to come to terms with some things about himself, about what he believes, and how he's living life. And so this book came in my life at a roughly similar period of where, as I said in the previous podcast, that questions. I really like questions. And so this book really gave me the environment to start asking questions about what I'm believing, why I'm believing them, and what I'm supposed to take from what I'm seeing with my own 2 eyes, whether I believe it or not. And which is why that book in particular really came down to what I would call trust and disbelief. That there is an ability, there's an opportunity to maintain trust with the people around you, with your friends, with your family, even with your faith. For me, I believe in the God of the Bible and in Jesus Christ. And so I have definitely had the experiences, I believe as a lot of Christians have, a lot of believers in Jesus have, is that there is points in life that your trust in him is going to be tested, and it's going to be put in a way to where you're going to say, I either believe you or I don't believe you. And in this case, it came out in a science fiction story. And one of the reasons why I enjoyed this story so much was because it made it feel very realistic, and it wasn't too far-fetched. Some of these sci-fi stuff that I've even seen is just so far-fetched. You go, it just doesn't really fit. It doesn't really fit. And not only that, interestingly enough, I was actually having a conversation with a guy just yesterday. We were talking about all these new cars that are on the road and how you can't even work on your own car anymore. And I said to him, yeah, I'd rather watch Star Trek than live Star Trek. My lifestyle is just not compatible for that sort of thing. Right. Sure. And so as a result, what I like about Vanished is that it brings it into the more realm of possibility, brings it a little closer to Earth. And as a result, causes for me to make that connection with Perry and the questions that he has to deal with throughout the story. And so that would be my first one. Excellent. And that now Alton, he's written a lot of books, and they tend toward the almost paranormal, the science fiction element. But it's mostly just books. He's only got one of his older novels in audiobook form. Most of his new stuff is in audiobook form, but that's it. There's no other format. But if you're looking for a great little mystery science fiction read, there's you some really good options.
Excellent. And number 2?
Okay, number 2, I'm going to go with The Shadow at Evening by Chris Walley. Chris Walley is an author out of England. He is also a believer, and which is a little unusual considering that in England, especially Europe, Christianity it doesn't have as big of an influence as it used to. But I found Chris Walley, let's see, that was about 10 years ago, roughly. Yeah, about 10 years ago. And as I said, I haven't been that big of a science fiction reader, but when I picked up his book, I picked it up because of two things. One, the description said that it was a story made in league with C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. And at that point in my reading career, I'm going, okay, this is definitely something, okay, that might interest me. But then also it was the element of the story that suggests that this is taking place during the 1,000-year reign of Jesus.
Ooh.
And I thought, that's kind of fascinating. I've got some other books along those lines of where it brings in some stuff out of scripture and it makes it into a really compelling story. I'll bring those up in later podcasts. But for this one, he has a gentleman who's basically, now, I used to work in national parks, and the main character is what could be labeled as a national forest worker. He's a tree guy. And so he's monitoring forests and how they're growing and everything. And I'm going, this is definitely up my alley. It's already hitting some key points for me. I'm loving this. But what he starts experiencing is now theology aside, and whatever camp people are in, that's fine. But in the story, the aspect of sin is there, but people don't necessarily think about it. They don't think about it. They're just not naturally inclined to go around sinning. And so suddenly he starts experiencing things that he's never really thought of before or done before. And he's really forced to address himself in a way of going, wait a minute, why did I just lie? What purpose did that serve me? And so the key point of the story is that it's already been most of that 1,000 years, and it's coming towards the end of that 1,000-year reign. But during that 1,000 years, mankind has been able to spread out through the universe and terraform planets. And so it's got some fun elements to it. But at the same time, it doesn't deter from asking those serious questions, such as why am I sinning? And what purpose does it serve me to sin? And there are other elements to it as well. But that story, when I read it at the time, I appreciated it so much because it was a time where I was already being approached by a lot of younger men and asked to, quote unquote, mentor them. But for me, it was just sitting down and talking. But it really brought up the aspect of holiness, I saw, in some very interesting ways. But more specifically, holiness within the context of knowledge. What do you know? And it took me back a lot to Genesis, a great deal to Genesis. And as you and I both have had, there's one author that Matt and I both have enjoyed a lot, and he's got some amazing books about Genesis. But to be able to revisit Genesis, a very familiar story that has that lullaby effect, a phrase that I got from Matt, and I like that a lot. It pulls back that lullaby effect and allows you to see it in a whole new way. And so I really appreciated that story in that way. So yeah, Chris Walley, he wrote, that's the first of, I believe it was a trilogy. And I only know it to be in hardcover forms. I mean, hard copy. So you can get it in paperback or hardcover. I have not seen any audiobooks, and there's no other media that it's been put out with. So maybe one day, this is one book that I hope one day be done as a full cast reading. That would be a blast.
That sounds
would be
excellent.
An absolute blast.
As you were describing that one, I was wondering how it falls into the category of sci-fi, right up until you said terraforming other planets and spreading across the galaxy. Okay.
Yep.
Before that, it almost sounded like fantasy, but now I'm getting the sci-fi element of it.
Well, and that was that fantasy element, because a lot of the forest and trees you definitely see in Tolkien. And Tolkien, the personality of the forest in Tolkien were always very distinct, very real. And so it gave off that fantasy vibe. And as a result, it made me more interested in the story. But then when it brought in the science fiction, now science fiction, when you're starting to read a lot, when maybe say in a starship, it's such an inorganic setting and environment that it can be hard to kind of put yourself in that unless you're already inclined to that sort of environment. I was not that inclined. I didn't grow up with a computer screen. I didn't even grow up with a TV screen for some of my childhood. And so for me, it was science fiction has proven a little bit more difficult to try to get into, but the stuff I've found has been an absolute blast, which
excellent
will bring me to my third book. So the third novel that I've really enjoyed is Arana's Visitor by Julie Rollins. The Videla, I'm pretty sure I'm saying this correctly. The Videla Chronicles is what she calls her series. And it is, let's see here. Let's set up the first book. So the first book, you've got a college-age guy who is who's basically said, I don't believe in God anymore. And he is left with asking some basic questions, but he's not really asking the questions. He's just living life until this visitor pops into his world, his little bubble, and everything goes kaboom, especially with his idea of being presented with an alien standing in front of him. Wait a minute. Wait a minute, we're the only people. Doesn't the Bible say we're the? And so he's presented with all sorts of questions of going, well, wait a minute. I thought it's Christianly accepted that there are no other aliens. There's no other sentient beings in the universe. And so he's met with that quandary. And then he's also met with the quandary of, well, I've usually been above board guy. I don't break the law. I don't do this or that so that it doesn't cause me problems. But now I'm having to hide an alien that a secret organization is after. And it's a, if you see the book, you're going to see it. It's a, now, I don't know where she got the inspiration from. I could almost suggest it was Sesame Street's Big Bird, but it is a very large bird alien. And I mean, it's a big bird. It's Big Bird, but it's white and it's got usable wings and everything. And so you go, okay, it's not something that I would have gone to when it comes to an alien, but when you get into it, it doesn't really matter of what it looks like. She ends up presenting an alien that can learn languages like that can consume knowledge in a way to where not only could it learn the language as it's learning something about that people or about that world, but that the creature shows it is a creature of incredible intelligence. And because of that, while it can be in the stage of learning, being that almost toddler-esque approach of you're developing how to think in this language, how to interact in this language, is asking some very simple questions of the character. And ultimately, the character's faced with one thing. Do I turn him in or do I help him run? And as a result, he ends up being taken off the planet to the alien's world. Now, in my previous podcast, I mentioned Raymond Feist. Raymond Feist is not a believer. He's not a Christian. And so I was approaching that from my own point of view, personal perspective, and what it meant to me as a Christian and where it met me in life.
Sure.
Now, Rollins is a Christian. She is a believer in Jesus. And so she and like many other Christian writers and novelists bring in elements of Christianity. Some are quite blatant, some are not, some are subtle, some are over the top. And one of the things that really turns me off, it just does in fantasy and or science fiction, is when things get preachy. And I mean preachy. I've come across some books where I've just, okay, because it takes the person out of the world, it takes them out of the context, out of the environment, and it's forcing them into another one. And so as a result, I lose the enjoyment that I've been in. I lose the context I've been in and where I've been up to that point of a story. Julie, though, incorporates it in a way that was well done. In the first place, it starts here in our world, so it's feasible that, okay, that element's going to be brought in. But at the same time, she has the alien saying, wait a minute. Yeah, we believe that there is a creator. And so it creates this unique little bond between the main character and the alien. And so as a result, you find them both in sort of a spiritual journey. And it makes it even more conceivable that what he ends up going to the alien planet to do would work and make sense. So I'm going to leave it there so you can go find out what he goes to the alien planet to do. And one of the other aspects I really liked about the story was that it was very visually driven. She was very great. Oh, she was very good at doing visuals. Even when you look at the artwork of the book, it's really very, very good. It's got it's not very bright, but it's got brighter colors than normal, because when you look at a fantasy novel, say even Magician's Apprentice by Raymond Feist, tends to have a darker tones to it. But this one has brighter tones to it, and it has very vivid colorization. And so one of the things, her cover matches how she tells her story very vividly. So that one, and interestingly enough, her story made me think a little bit about Alton Gansky and another book he wrote that put man on the moon. So yeah, just some really great. I liked how these three books really brought each of them together and coalesced in some ways that really worked well. It kind of reminded me of a kaleidoscope, really. They worked in and out of each other pretty well. And so those would definitely be my my top 3 science fiction books.
Excellent. And what forms does that one come in? Is it hard copy only?
So you can get digital, and you can also get hard copy. There, to my knowledge, still that there's no audiobooks on that either, but hopefully someday that'll be made available. But that's what we've got for now.
Yep. And that one, the way you described it, also made me wonder if it would be a really good film as well.
Oh yeah. I know that there's a lot of independent organizations these days, even Christian-based, that are trying to venture more into some of these more science fiction, paranormal, fantasy stories. One of which even did a retelling of Pilgrim's Progress recently, called Heaven Quest. And so I think it'd be really neat to see this play out. And it doesn't have to be, so Hollywood, they have great cinematography. They've got great ways of coming right up here to the top-notch science fiction. You want certain aspects of picture, sound, just levels of quality that you want in a science fiction story. But I found that in some of these cases, especially on YouTube, there are some organizations out there that are putting out some great stuff on simple budgets, and yet it's still compelling.
Excellent.
It's still compelling, and so I would actually like to see that one in a visual form for sure. I agree.
Very nice. So maybe after our next 2 episodes of fantasy films and sci-fi films of your top picks, maybe after that you can talk to us about some of the ones on YouTube that people could go and check out.
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. There's some fun ones too. And that's the thing about story. It doesn't have to be long. Now, there are people who want that long. They want the epic scope. So you got Raymond Feist, and you got a lot of those authors that worked with Dell Publishing. And so that definitely captures between late 60s into the 90s, especially. They're still doing the mass markets, and they're still publishing stuff today. But the work of story doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be. And I can name a few authors right now that are more complex than they need to be. But story in its purest, most simple form is to meet people where they're at in life, be able to reflect themselves, if not be able to at least connect with the characters in a meaningful way in order to make that story plausible, conceivable, but also valuable. I would say valuable in that way. And so sometimes you just don't need that long, lengthy thing. I like writing short stories myself, and sometimes I like them and sometimes I don't. But for the most part, I've read the 1,000-page novel. I've actually read novellas that were 3-5 pages, and enjoyed them just as much as I enjoyed the 1,000. Well, maybe the 1,000-page novel had me more wanting to take a nap after I was done. So I had more bandwidth to think about the short story.
Sure. Yes. Yes.
But anyways, yeah, I completely agree with you. It'd be really cool to see that book in visual form.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I think that's our episode for today. So until next time, happy reading or listening, however you consume your fiction and sci-fi, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care.